again at the wonderful Cat and Mouse game store here in Chicago, Illinois to introduce Small World Underground. Now this is a new solo box expansion to the original Small World. So what I mean by that is all the pieces are backwards compatible with the original game, but it also is an own self-standing game in its own right. So you can play just from this box. It is not just an expansion, it is its own game. So I'm going to assume that anybody watching this video already knows how to play Small World. So if you don't know how to play that yet, you might want to go find out. Today, our review is just going to be about how Underground is different. So what you need to know literally to open up Underground and play it right from the get-go, as long as you've played Small World before. Just like its predecessor, it's also for 2 to 5 players. Takes somewhere between an hour to maybe a full 2 hours depending on how many players you has, and has a lot of the same feels as its original base, or they're calling it above ground predecessor. Setup for Small World Underground is nearly identical to that of the base game. You're going to be putting out black mountain pieces instead of regular mountain pieces on the black mountain spaces, just as you would in the original game. And in this one, where you would normally be placing those native races, in this one we're putting in monsters. And you're putting in 2 per tile instead of previously where we just did 1 for the native races. In addition, the one other thing that's different about setup is for each of these monster spots, which is the equivalent of native races, I have the 2-player board set up here, so I have 4 of those spaces. I'm going to set up an equal number of those bonus tiles up there. So since I have 4 spaces, I have 4 bonus tiles. And other than that, setup for the game is identical, with 6 special powers and 6 races lined up along the edge of the board. Now, gameplay is 90% familiar from what you remember from regular Small World. I'm going to select my race exactly the same way I normally would, and then I'm going to enter into the board from any spot that's along the edge of the game board. Unfortunately, there are these no-go spots that have a do not enter sign. I cannot touch those nor cross through them at all. So I'm going to come right in between them, come into those mystic crystals there. And then as I conquer in a line across here, I'm going to enter one of these spaces that have our monster tokens, which again were in place of native races. Now, as is typical, it takes me 2 pieces of cardboard just to enter that area, and then it takes me an additional piece of cardboard for each additional piece of cardboard that's in that area. Since there are 2 monsters, I need 2 more pieces of cardboard for a total of 4 troops to conquer that area. Now that is much more expensive than the base game, but there is a bonus here, and that is those bonus tiles that we laid out during our setup. I'm going to grab one at random, I'm going to put it there on that tile, and that is now there for the rest of the game. It augments that spot for whoever is the active player who controls that region. In this one, this is the Sword of the Killer Rabbit. Allows me to conquer one region for a lot less tokens that would normally take me. If I go into decline or if I get defeated, this tile will stay, but the power would now switch to that new active player. Now there are a couple of these that do apply when going into decline, and I'll zoom in as best I can. There is that little tower or column decline symbol there to let you know that that is a power that would apply unusually during decline. Now, the river is the last addition to this board, which is going to feel a lot different. Now, let's say I'm on my second turn with the Mudmen here. I've now kind of conquered a little line across one side of the board here, and I now want to advance to the other side of the board. I can cross the river. It only takes me 1 Mudman to do so, and then I can evade as normal into other regions of the board. But when I get ready to deploy, so that's the redeployments when you're shuffling around your tiles right at the end of the turn, I have to remove all the pieces from the river and redeploy them somewhere else. So I'm basically just using 1 tile as a bridge to get across the river. Now there are some races and some special powers that may augment that rule somewhat, but as long as it doesn't say anything about rivers, assume that you can never stay there at the end of your turn. Now, a lot of people have been asking if Small World Underground is compatible with original Small World and all of its expansions, and the answer is, for the most part, yes. You can both bring the underground creatures and powers up to the surface, as they say, or you can bring the surface creatures down to the underground map. And the exchange is pretty straightforward. So the black mountain pieces here correspond to the mountain pieces up top on the surface. The marsh areas here correspond to the muddy spots correspond to marsh regions. The mushroom forests are equal to the regular forest. The mining symbols here equate to things that have that little mine icon on them, and the mystic crystals correspond to things that have the little magic symbol on them. Unfortunately, the one thing that does not translate at all is farmland. So if you have a special race like the humans or any of the special powers that are attached to farmlands, unfortunately, those one will not carry forward. There are a couple special races also here in Underground that would also not carry forward, things that are based on these no-go zones or things that are based on the river that are really specific to those boards. There's a lot of information. If you go to Days of Wonder webpage, they'll give you a lot more information on how you can translate one board to the other, and there's quite a bit printed in the rulebook as well. And finally, just like in the base game, each player gets their own player aid here that has all of the special powers, and unique to this game, all of the relics or the popular places that you get from defeating monster areas. And on the reverse side has descriptions of all the races and their powers. So I'm not going to go through these because they're so well laid out in the game that you can just read them through at your leisure. And they're also explained even more in depth in the rules. But as I mentioned before, a couple of them are very specific to this map and would not transfer over onto the base board or the above ground board. So that should give you an idea of how Underground differs from its predecessor, original Small World. And the relationship between these two is much the same relationship between Dominion and then Dominion Intrigue. So Intrigue is a self-standing game, but it is also backwards compatible with the base game. So you can treat it as one humongous expansion for the base game, but then you could also just play it from its own box in its own right. And Underground is much the same way, that you could expand the base game immensely, or you can just play it on its own as an old self-standing game. So if you really love Small World, you probably also really love Underground. I will tell you right now, it's definitely more cutthroat. That board is smaller on purpose. So rather than, maybe attacking people every once in a while, you're going to be going after your neighbors a lot. So if that appeals to you, then you probably really want to give Small World Underground a try.
Thanks for watching our review today. For more information about board games, as well as the #1 board game audio podcast, check out Dicetower.com for reviews, interviews, and more. I'm Eric Summerer, and you've been watching The Dice Tower.